situation. Always trust your gut.
Hello, my name is Chrissy Champagne. You are listening to Residue, a true crime podcast dedicated to keeping you paranoid. Residue is not just another true crime podcast, but a necessary tool for those who want to understand the dangers lurking in the real world. You are listening to episode 69. This is the story of Justine Vanderschoot. As always, listener discretion is advised. Do you think that we could play another game? Maybe I can win this time. I kind of like the misery you put me through. Darling, you can trust me completely. If you even try to look the other way, I think that I could kill this time. It doesn't really seem I'm getting through to you, though I see you weeping so sweetly. I think that you might have to take another taste, a little bit of hell this time. You always wanted people to remember you, to leave your little mark on society. Don't you know your wish is coming true today? Getting a mixtape, a mix CD from someone is such a cool and personal gift because it's like they're sharing a little piece of themselves through music. The lyrics I just read were from a song called The Game by the band Disturbed. This was one of the songs that Danny Bezemer put on a mixed CD for his girlfriend, Justine Vanderschoot, on September 1st, 2003. Justine Vanderschoot, born March 30th, 1986, was the kind of girl everyone admired. She was the kind of girl that we could all see a little piece of ourselves in. She was athletic, beautiful, social, and very responsible. At just 17 years old, she had already built a life that many could only dream of. A new job, a close-knit family, and a promising future. She was independent, confident, and loved by all who knew her. But on September 2nd, 2003, her life would take a tragic turn that no one could have foreseen. On September 1st, 2003, the Vanderschoot family had a little dinner at their home, a barbecue. It was Labor Day weekend, and Justine's parents had just returned home from celebrating camping all weekend, wanted to keep the party going. Justine always had many friends over at her home. She had a sister named Christine, and the two were very friendly, very social, and the Vandershoots wanted to make sure that their daughters grew up in a home that was just always full of joy, full of love, friends, family. You know, the Vanderschoot house was the hangout. One of the people that was always at the Vanderschoot house was 21-year-old Brandon Fernandez. One day, Brandon brought a friend named Danny Bezemer to the house. Daniel was Brandon's roommate. Daniel just fell head over heels for Justine the minute he walked into the Vanderschoot house, and Justine fell in crush with him. Everyone thought that this relationship was perfect. These two wanted to be together nonstop. They loved each other. You know how that teenage love feels? You're just so obsessed with the other person. You just want to be around them all the time. But this started to feel a little odd to Justine's parents because Justine was a social butterfly. She loved going out with her friends, being with her friends. But lately, she was just with Daniel a lot. And Daniel even ended up staying in the family home for a little while before he was roommates with Brandon. So Daniel is attending this barbecue on Labor Day weekend. He stays at the Vanderschoot house until about 8 o'clock at night. He leaves, goes home, and Justine helps her mother organize some invites for a jewelry party that they were going to be throwing. After helping her mom out for a little bit, Justine then goes up to her bedroom and calls her sister, stays on the phone with her sister for about 2 hours. And then she goes to bed. It was a normal morning on September 2nd, 2003, when Lynette Vanderschoot, Justine's mother, wakes to find the front door of their home slightly ajar, and Justine's silver Chevy truck is missing from its spot underneath the tree, its usual spot. Her mother also notices that Justine's purse is still at home. Her bedroom TV was still left on, and her dog was inside sleeping on her bed. And at first, as a mother, Lynette just assumed that Justine had gone to her boyfriend Danny's house and they spent the night together the night before. But as hours start passing, it became clear that something was wrong. By early afternoon, Lynette receives a call from Danny. He said he went to bring Justine lunch. She had a job at a cardiologist's office. He arrived at her office, and they said she didn't come to work that day. She was nowhere to be found. This is when the concern is setting in. Lynette calls the Placer County Sheriff's Department, and the investigation begins quickly. The authorities took this seriously, and they started ASAP on the search for Justine Vanderschoot. A lot of times in these cases, we hear that the investigation was stalled for a little bit, such as the case with Jennifer Ertman and Elizabeth Pena that we just talked about a couple weeks ago. But this sheriff's department was like full gear, full speed ahead. They quickly discover that Justine's cell phone pinged near North Auburn. But despite the media storm that quickly followed, I'm talking flyers, social media posts, and friends and family running around town just pleading for information, there was still no sign of Justine. Nothing. No one had heard from her. Her family, especially her sister Christine, rushed home from college to help with the search, but it seemed that Justine had just simply vanished. Her family doesn't know where she is. Her boyfriend doesn't know where she is. Her friends haven't heard from her. Right away, the search is on for Justine's truck because it wasn't at home and they had to find this truck. So police are searching everywhere for the Chevy silver truck that Justine owned. I mean, this truck was her prized possession. She got that job at the cardiologist office to be able to pay for this truck. She loved this truck. So as volunteers are passing out flyers in local parking lots, one volunteer approaches a truck and realizes, I think this is Justine's truck. And that volunteer was her best friend, Michaela. And Michaela was right. This was Justine's truck. And the truck looked like it had no signs of a struggle. It just looked like a normal teenager's vehicle. There was nothing inside or outside of that truck that police could use for evidence. I mean, but obviously the big question is how and why is that truck in this parking lot? As the investigation continued, the police began to question everyone in Justine's life, and obviously Danny is going to be their number one suspect. They also questioned his roommate, Brandon Fernandez. It was soon discovered that the relationship between Justine and Danny was far from perfect. What many thought was a happy, healthy relationship was actually a controlling, jealous dynamic. Danny had grown possessive of Justine, often telling her male friends that they couldn't hug her, they couldn't touch her, they couldn't hang out with her. So Justine started pulling away from her friends, and she grew more isolated from everyone that loved her as time went on. One piece of crucial information surfaced when the police discovered that Justine had gone on spring break earlier that year. While in Florida, she met a young sailor stationed in Pensacola. Now, this sailor was several years older than her boyfriend, Danny. The relationship was very brief, but somehow it sparked something inside of Justine. She just began to think more about her future and whether Danny was the right person for her. However, the sailor was ruled out as a suspect and investigators focused back on Danny. The investigation into Danny and Brandon began to take a dark turn. When police tapped their phones, they uncovered a conversation that would change everything. Brandon had spoken to a friend who had been at his house the night Justine disappeared. The friend was feeling guilty, so this friend went back home and told his father about the night's events, and the father urged this teenage friend to go to the police. So I know that's a little confusing. So the night that Justine went missing, Danny and Brandon, who lived together, had two friends sleep over. Now, one of these friends is feeling really guilty about something that he heard had happened on the night that Justine went missing. So police have this boy that came forward. They have him call Brandon and they tap the phone. And when they listen to that conversation, the conversation between Brandon and the boy was chilling. Brandon was trying to convince this friend to, quote, stick to the plan. It was clear that something sinister happened, and all of the signs are pointing to Brandon and Danny. 2 weeks after Justine's disappearance, police finally took Brandon into custody for questioning. And they brought in the FBI, knowing that Brandon had a fascination with the FBI. So the FBI is now on the case, and Brandon, who had already been on edge, begins to crack under the weight of the evidence against him, the phone call that was tapped. And now he's really nervous with the FBI agents sitting in the interrogation room with him. So Brandon just breaks. It didn't take long for Brandon to confess to everything that happened on the night of September 1st and then the early morning hours of September 2nd. Meanwhile, the Vandershoots are holding a vigil in the parking lot where Justine's car was found. They have hundreds of people there handing out flyers, holding candles, and even though police already have their sights set on Brandon and Danny, they are not going to keep looking for any lead they can. So as we know, police will often send officers undercover to events such as memorials or vigils, just so that they can scan the crowd, take pictures of everyone in the crowd so that they can go back, look at those pictures and see if anyone looks suspicious. But on this night, at this vigil, there is a man dressed in complete black, just standing by himself off in the distance of the parking lot. He's not really, socializing with anyone. He looks sort of out of place. He looks a little odd. So one of Justine's friends walks up to him with a flyer and she says, "Here, have you seen this girl?" And the guy says, "No, I don't want that flyer. Don't give it to me." And he drops something on the ground and he runs away. So now everyone's thoughts are on this strange man who was acting a little weird at the vigil. What he dropped on the ground was a sort of trophy, they say. It was a little memento, and on it, it said something about losing a daughter, how losing a daughter could be the worst thing in the world for a father or for a mother. And as police looked deeper into this suspect, they did come to find out that this man lost his teenage daughter also. So he was just there trying to show support in any way that he could. I thought I would mention that incident during the vigil because I loved the fact that the police were just on everyone. They were so vigilant in their investigation. Back at the police station, when police played the recording of Brandon and Daniel's friend confessing to everything he heard that night, that's when Brandon just broke. So Brandon confesses to everything, and he tells detectives that he will lead them to a secluded area near Applegate, 5 miles outside of town, where he and Danny buried Justine. As they arrived at the site, Brandon insisted that he had never been there before, but police could see right through that. Brandon was actually pointing out, like, "Don't step in that hole. Oh, there's a little ditch over here." Brandon had clearly been to this spot many times. The area was a dumping ground. There were rotting mattresses, propane tanks. There was a trailer that was decaying, and this is where they buried Justine's body. Her grave was shallow. It was only about 4 feet deep. It was covered with dirt, branches, plywood. It was as if someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. There was a mattress thrown on top of all of that. As investigators unearthed her body, the truth of her death became clear. Justine had been strangled and suffocated. The murder had been planned months in advance. It was cruel and it was calculated. It was an act of control. This was an act meant to punish Justine for seeking independence and for talking to another boy. When Justine arrived home from her spring break in Florida, she was so excited about meeting this new man, this older man who was nice to her, who was kind to her. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't possessive. So she was bragging about it to all of her friends. She was talking about how handsome he was, how sweet he was. And of course, this gets back to Danny. And Danny is possessive, jealous, he's angry. He 100% believes Justine is cheating on him. And when you have those feelings, of course you're going to confide in your best friends. And he's confiding all of this in Brandon. Because you might be wondering, why was Brandon involved in any of this? What did Brandon have to do with any of this? Brandon disliked Justine to the extreme. This was because Brandon was cheating on his girlfriend and Justine was friends with Brandon's girlfriend. So Justine told his girlfriend that Brandon was cheating. So this is going to obviously cause friction between Brandon and his girlfriend. And now Justine is telling Danny to stop hanging out with Brandon. They do for a little bit. They kind of lose touch, but then they get back together thinking everything might have been smoothed over by this point, but not in Brandon's mind. Not at all. Friends say that Brandon despised Justine and would often call her names in conversations with other friends. He would talk about his dislike of her, how he wished that Danny wasn't dating her. So now when Danny's coming to him and telling him, I think Justine's cheating on me, of course Brandon's going to be lighting that fire, putting fuel on that fire. And these two, when they were together, they were not a good team. Danny had a history of thefts, burglaries, possession of stolen property, and Brandon was prosecuted for computer hacking. The guy was like a tech genius. And after talking to many friends, the detectives find out that Brandon and Danny had this fascination with killing people. They always talked about how they would dispose of a body or how they could beat a polygraph. And all of this was well before the disappearance of Justine. Natalie Morales interviewed friends and family for CBSNews.com, and she was told that Danny used to say that there were a couple spots where if he ever wanted to kill you, nobody would ever find you. And this was something that his friends just thought was a joke. They also found out that Brandon had created a website ranking levels of violence. He had pictures of dead people dying on that website. But Brandon was obviously the first one to break down and confess to everything. So while the police did have Brandon in that room, the FBI agents asked him, how long was it planned to hurt Justine? And Brandon says, long. He had planned it forever almost. Brandon told them that Danny had tapped Justine's phone to catch her cheating and then confront her with this evidence. Brandon said he didn't know what was going to happen, and he insisted that he had no idea that the night of September 1st into the early morning hours of September 2nd, he did not know that Danny was seeking revenge on that night. He said they talked about it, but this wasn't something that they planned. But FBI agents call bullshit on that because a local man came forward. Now, this man was an equestrian. He loved riding his horse through the trails in the same spot that Justine's body was found. And a couple of days before the murder, this man was riding his horse and he came across a huge ditch, a hole that was dug into the ground. And that is the same exact shallow grave that they found Justine's body in. So this was definitely planned. Those two boys went up to Applegate and they dug a hole, knowing what they were going to do with it. This was a 4-foot deep grave. This was planned out. Detectives bring Danny in and he says, no, Brandon's lying. I didn't do any of this. This is Brandon's fault, if anything. They're both turning on each other. So Brandon is saying that he didn't know this was going to happen. He was just along for the ride. Danny did everything. And Danny's saying that's not true. This was Brandon's entire idea. He planned the whole entire thing. But, I mean, this evidence is just crazy mounting against Danny, and he has no other choice but to just finally admit that he was there. But he still claims Brandon was the mastermind. So, what happened the night that Justine went missing? We have Brandon's side of the story. So this is what Brandon says happened. While being interviewed, he says that they started tapping Justine's phone. They started recording her conversations. Danny was always spying on Justine. They heard a conversation between Justine and her best friend, Michaela, where Justine said that she wanted to break up with Danny and then move in with Michaela. And then the two of them can just start a new chapter in their life. Two best friends living together. Danny lost his damn mind. Brandon tells detectives that they had been planning this for 9 months. 9 months. They're listening to her phone calls. They're planning her murder. They know how to get rid of a body. So they call Justine on September 1st, 2003, and they tell her that they want her to come joyriding with them. They're going to go steal some marijuana plants around town. So she says, yeah, that would be fun. Let's go. Justine leaves her home. She drives her truck to their typical meeting spot, which was that parking lot that her truck was found in. She gets out of her truck and she gets into the car with Brandon and Danny. And when they are inside of this truck, they tell her they're taking her to the hillside. The boys tell Justine that they made her a mixed CD and they want to play that CD for her while they're on this drive. Danny wanted this to be the last song that Justine heard before he killed her. And this is the song, The Game by Disturbed. That's not the creepy part. The creepy part is that Danny and Brandon took those phone call conversations, secretly recorded those private conversations of Justine with Michaela, Justine talking to the sailor she met in Florida. They took snippets of those conversations and they edited those in to the song, The Game. So Justine must have been so frightened in the backseat of that truck. Let me refresh you on what those lyrics were, and I want you to imagine your private conversations of you telling your best friend that you want to break up with your boyfriend and move in with her. Pretend that, we've all had those conversations. Pretend you can hear those conversations in between the lyrics to this song when you're driving alone in a truck with two men who are about to kill you. Is she really telling lies again? Doesn't she realize she's in danger? Is she not right? Is she insane? Will she now run for her life in the battle that ends this day? Is she not right? Is she insane? Will she now run for her life now that she lied to me? And now she will never tell another lie. Danny is fucking demented. Brandon claims that after they played this song for Justine, they arrived at the spot where they were going to bury her. He says that Danny told him to get out of the car and go away. He was going to do this on his own. This is Brandon's version. Brandon says he walked away, walked around the woods for a little bit, and that is when he heard screaming and he heard a car horn beeping. So he ran back to the spot. When he got back to where the car was parked, he said that he saw Danny with his hands around Justine's neck, and there was a taser next to her body on the ground. Brandon said that Danny looked at him and he looked psychotic. He looked insane. He was laughing and he looked at Brandon and said, "I win, I win." Detectives will say that Brandon is constantly lying. He at one point said that Justine was already dead when they buried her, and then he will say he did hear her breathing, like a really, quote, screwed up breath when they buried her. So Brandon is just so inconsistent. He does say that they removed Justine's clothing, and then they put her in the grave, and then they poured a liquid over her body to decompose her body quicker. And detectives never did find out what exactly that liquid was. Justine's cause of death was listed as homicidal violence, but the autopsy revealed that Justine had ingested dirt, and there is no other way to ingest dirt unless she was still alive when those boys put her in the ground. Danny Bezemer and Brandon Fernandez are both arrested for first-degree murder. The family fears that there's going to be a long trial. This is not something that they want to deal with, and thankfully both boys take a plea deal. In 2005, Danny Bezemer pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of 25 years to life. Brandon Fernandez pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and he received 15 years to life. So the boys really planned on getting a life sentence that allowed them to be eligible for parole, because they both thought that they might have a chance of getting out one day. But no, Justine's family is not going to stand for this, and it has now become their mission to make sure that those two pieces of shit stay in jail. Brandon Fernandez came up for parole in 2017, and he was denied. And every time that they come up for parole, the family has to go through this again. Justine's mother explains that when you lose a loved one in this manner and you have to learn how to move on with your life, you have to learn how to figure out a new way of life without them in it anymore. You never really do fully recover, but you do learn how to wake up each day, how to take the next step. And obviously, it is always going to hurt. Every day is going to be a struggle, but you start to learn how to live your life again. Then a parole hearing comes up. Justine's mother said, and then you don't sleep for a month, and then you're there at the parole hearing. You have to sit there and listen to these two rant and rave for 5 hours about why they should be released, and then the family reads their impact statements, and she says it just rips her heart out every single time. And then it takes weeks afterward to try and get back to any sort of normalcy again. The state of California changed the law of murder in 2018. This new law would provide a means of vacating a conviction, and you would be allowed a resentencing if you were a defendant who was not actually the killer. So in 2020, Brandon Fernandez files a petition to get out of his murder conviction based on this new law. So the DA would have to prove that Brandon Fernandez helped plan and carry out the murder. And the DA brings in Danny Bezemer as the key witness. Danny tells the judge how Brandon was the one that dug the grave. Brandon was the one that brought a shovel from his father's shed. I mean, basically, Danny's letting the judge know that he didn't plan this on his own, and Brandon is just as guilty as he is. I mean, Brandon was the tech guy. Brandon was the guy that knew how to tap Justine's phone. Brandon was the guy that had the foresight to change his tires on his car the day after the murder because he knew that the FBI was going to be looking at the tire tracks. There are 2 weeks of testimony during this trial to get Brandon resentenced without life in prison. And if he does get the approval of the judge, Brandon will walk free. The Vanderschoots do not sit back and take anything. Christine, Justine's sister, starts sending out petitions to get a ton of signatures. She goes on social media. She asks people, please sign this. And then hundreds of people gather with a candlelight vigil outside of the courthouse during these proceedings for Brandon. I'm talking hundreds show up. This community does not forget. On August 1st, 2024, the Vandershoots, all of the community, all of their supporters, then there's Brandon Fernandez and his parents ready for the judge's ruling. Will Brandon Fernandez walk free out of this courthouse? No way. This judge denies Brandon's motion and upheld his conviction. Justine Vanderschoot was a go-getter. Her father says that he believed that if she was still alive, she would have opened her own salon because she loved making people feel beautiful. The Vandershoots will not let this tragedy be the only thing that people remember about Justine. They started a Justine Vanderschoot Fund pamphlet. And now this pamphlet, this book, is handed out to kids, to students in schools all across their state. This pamphlet educates kids on what a good relationship looks like. And Justine's mom says that kids have come up to her and thanked her for receiving this pamphlet when they were younger. They said that this pamphlet saved them from some horrible mistakes that they could have made in their own relationships. The family wants to teach that this isn't normal. Jealousy and rage is not normal in a relationship. You need to get help. And if kids can learn this when they are younger, then maybe tragedies like this won't happen. The Vandershoots are going to have to deal with 2 more parole hearings in the next 2 years. But Justine Vanderschoot says, we're not going away. We're never giving up. Thank you so much for joining me again this week on Residue. Oh my God, I love a family that fights back. You guys know I appreciate you so very much. And you also know that Residue is created, hosted, edited, researched, and produced by me, Chrissy Champagne. If you could do a couple things for me, that would be really awesome. If you could follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to Residue. If you could follow me on social media, on TikTok at Residue Podcast, and also under Chrissy Champagne. I think I messed up. I'm old. I don't know how to work social media sometimes. I'm trying to make a bunch of videos so that I can entertain you on the socials, but you got to follow me there first. Also, Facebook at Residue, a True Crime Podcast, and Instagram, Residue Podcast. Did I already say that? Just find me anywhere you can. And also, find me back here next Tuesday at midnight because I'm going to have another probably really sad story for you. I wouldn't get too excited. But anyway, thank you for always showing up. And don't forget to stay safe and stay